Hey, what's going on, good people? It's Gardner Douglas, the Oyster Ninja. I'm here with this familiar face. It should be for you, um, Mr. Chris Sherman from Island Creek Oysters. Man, this guy is the CEO, the president, CEO. It means very important person to the oyster industry. What's going on, Chris? How you feel?
Hey Gardner, thanks for having me on, man. Feeling good.
For sure, man. So let's just introduce Island Creek Oysters. No, you know what? Let's back up. Introduce yourself, man.
Can do. So I'm Chris Sherman. As you said, I'm CEO of Island Creek, guilty as charged, and I've been working here in the oyster business for the last 13 years, since I was in my early 20s, and I'm lucky enough to work in the community where I was born and raised. And I got to know a guy named Skip Bennett, who founded Island Creek and started farming really here. One of the first farmers in Massachusetts back in the late 80s, early 90s. And I knew Skip growing up. He was older than me, but I ran a little business in town, and some of my friends were some of his first employees. But I used to borrow tools from him and use his ice machine for icing down my beer in high school. and yeah, and it just kind of was a thing. And then I went away and I worked in the maritime trades, and I was a professional sailor, and ended up needing a job that would keep me on the water, but in one place. And I couldn't think of a better place than Duxbury. And fortunately, Skip had started to get a little bit of traction with the farm, and he had a sizable crop, and starting, the beginnings of making a name for Island Creek in Boston and New York. So I kind of let him do the hard work for the first, 15 years or so. And then I jumped on the bandwagon
That was
right
nice
at
of
the
you.
right
That
time.
was real nice. Yeah, go ahead and get it started and up and running. Where I just got to slide in here.
Exactly.
What's a professional sailor, man? Like, what's that like?
Yeah, so I built boats. So I built like super yachts and that type of thing, kind of in different places around the world. But then I sailed on yachts also. So anything from racing to private yacht crew, always on sailboats for me, never on motorboats. And yeah, it was a good gig for sure. But then 2008 happened, and the stock market crashed, and a lot of the whole yachting industry kind of got rocked. So I needed a new job.
Right, right. So, income Island Creek Oysters. So let's just all right. Let's go back to the beginning of Island Creek. How did So what was the beginning of Island Creek like in just the area, Massachusetts?
Yeah, so oddly enough, Skip grew up here like I did. Skip's family's been here for generations and generations, and his dad was a lobsterman, and he grew up, as a wild harvest shell fisherman on the bay through high school and college, and then he wanted to come back, excuse me, to Duxbury after he graduated from college and give it one or two more summers on the bay, harvesting mussels and clams and that type of thing, and had heard about ARC, down in, which is one of the first hatcheries, in the Northeast here, down on the Cape, and went and bought some clam seed actually, and put it out in Duxbury Bay, and just to kind of see what happened. I think he was looking to, he decided to kind of commit himself to life on the water, and I think he figured he would just be, poor for the rest of his life and be a water nut. And but he knew even back then that he needed something a little more stable than depending on the wild stock here in Duxbury, which is one small bay, and one storm could come through and wipe it out, and we've seen that with bay scallops and with mussels over the years. So that's why he kind of got into aquaculture. In a lot of ways, because of the Duxbury is kind of a strange little place, even for, Cape Cod, Massachusetts. The prevailing breeze is, it comes out of the southwest and blows a lot of surface water out into Cape Cod Bay. We have a barrier beach. It's really a unique little system. So for Skip to essentially fail at clams first and then switch to oysters was really prescient. I think that Skip's got an incredible instinct and green thumb, We call it blue thumb for oysters. And so I like to think that something told them that oysters would work. But ultimately, it's like kind of being the first person to stroll into, Napa Valley and throw a grapevine in the ground. It's just an incredible place to grow oysters. And really the rest is history. That was the difficult part. The environment does a lot of the work. And then we've just tried to make some good decisions over the years about how to run the business around it.
So can you talk a little bit about the Duxbury's terroir?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I was saying, there's a barrier beach, and you have this bay behind it. And if you look at Duxbury without any orientation or knowing what you're looking at, like if you took a snapshot of Google Maps and you just look down on it, you'd think it was a warm brackish estuary, right? With kind of lower salinity water, warm. There's not a lot of freshwater influence. When in fact, because of a number of factors, it's this super cold and almost full ocean salinity water. So you've got a little cut through Duxbury Beach, in between Duxbury and Plymouth Beach, where all this incredible tide swing, it's a 12-foot tide that comes twice a day through that little cut. So it creates this incredible kind of current, which is really the engine for growth for shellfish and certainly for our oysters. It's the conveyor belt of little microalgae that the oysters love to eat twice a day. So they can grow kind of robust, but then you have this incredible flavor that gets imparted on them by the type of food that they're eating, but also being in this protected bay in water that is like 33, 34 parts per thousand salinity. And also water that is really cold. I think the best thing that kind of indicates the difference is if you point directly east from Duxbury Bay, 17 miles across is Wellfleet, kind of the tip of the Cape. Obviously I don't know if you guys have heard of Wellfleet, but they grow oysters there too. and on a hot summer day, Wellfleet Harbor kind of catches that southwesterly and the water piles up. If you think of the Cape like shaped like your arm, Wellfleet's the hand catching that southwesterly that's blowing across from your shoulder. So on that day, in say July or August, Wellfleet could be 85 degrees Fahrenheit, even 90 degrees Fahrenheit in the harbor. And that's really good for oysters, and it's good for spawning. They have a huge wild set in Wellfleet. In Duxbury, on that same day, the water might only get up to 73, 74, 75 degrees. So it sounds like a small difference, but physiologically for an oyster, it's a massive difference. So much so that oysters don't spawn naturally here in Duxbury. All the oysters we grow are from seed. We really don't have any sort of wild set to speak of. But that, you can imagine what that does to the flavor and to the terroir of the oyster. They're kind of vastly different. And you think about microclimates in wine and things like that. And I think some of the marine microclimates that we see, particularly in an appellation like Massachusetts, there's even starker differences, say, than growing grapes on a valley versus, up on a plateau or something like that. So really just a dynamic environment, and couldn't ask for a better place to grow these things.
It really sounds like a oyster lover's haven, because you got Wellfleet on one side, Island Creek on the other, and basically two different flavor profiles. If you're really paying attention to the oyster's true flavor, which is what I try and teach to everybody I come across. Now, I got introduced to Island Creek oysters, I would say back in 2015, and the oysters that I was shucking back then compared to the oysters that I see now are totally different.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, it was like this gnarly shell with a hook. And at first, I did not like to shuck them. I'm going to be honest. I didn't like to shuck them. The meat quality was perfect. But the actual shell, I was like, oh my gosh, but I learned to deal with it. But so can you just, what happened over the years?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't even know if I have the best answer for it, but I have some ideas, because I agree. There's, the oysters definitely shift year over year in all of these locations. Like you look at the Rappahannocks, you look at the Wellfleets, like they change. I see a lot of oysters, right? I've been buying and selling oysters through our distribution company now for 10, 12 years, and it's incredible to see the shifts. I often wish I had done a better job of taking pictures and documenting it, but one of the things that is I think of crucial importance to the industry here in the Northeast is one of the things that I think is you can attribute some of those differences to, and that's the seed genetics. So there's just a few hatcheries that exist here in New England. There are restrictive regulations on moving seed from state to state. So ultimately, growers are, they only have so many choices of where they can buy their oyster seed. And the crazy thing to think about is, over a 10 or 15-year period, we've seen exponential growth in the number of farms, literally going from just a handful of farms to hundreds, and during that same period, we've seen the addition in the Northeast of just one commercial scale hatchery. And that's not even a big one, and that's ours. So you're getting seed from, the seed supply is tough, and it's a piece of vulnerability for the industry. But the last piece of it is that a lot of the hatcheries don't have like a sophisticated selective breeding program. They're certainly not doing genomics and things like that. That if you look at other sectors in agriculture, we're like in the Stone Age compared to other farmers who kind of raise livestock on land, or certainly, crop growers. And then the other piece of it is, even if you look down at like the Mid-Atlantic, some of the work that's happened at VIMS and then now has been privatized and commercialized by some of the bigger hatcheries in Virginia, for instance, they have real genetic lines that they've kept up and tracked performance and tried to breed in disease resistance and things like that. And so obviously there's these factors that you select for, but ultimately those factors and the selection over time ends up giving you a different phenotype, right? Like a different look to the oyster, different shell shape, meat consistency, that type of thing. So I would pin a lot of the differences on that, but then also, we've made some changes to how we grow them over the years, for sure. The Island Creeks are still all bottom planted, but our nursery process is a little different. Environmental conditions shift, so we have to change the way that we grow, the size at which we're planting them, things like that. So there's a few variables at play, but I would hold genetics up as probably the biggest. But very good observation, Gardner. I'm impressed with your eye for the
for sure, man. Honestly, man, like I said, and I want to say dang, man, I don't want to get in trouble, man, but because
Let's do it.
So I eat oysters, right? I eat oysters, but I don't really eat oysters.
Yeah,
is what I'm saying. So if I come across a new oysters that I've never shucked, I'll eat it. So I'm able to talk about the oyster and tell people about the flavor profile. But I would say your Island Creek was one of the first oysters that I actually enjoyed eating.
Glad to hear it.
As far as like flavor profile, texture, the way it broke down, and of course, like I said, it was like a nice deep cup, so it was a nice piece of meat too.
Yeah.
But the chef, I think he threw it in the oven for a little bit, and like not all the way. It was really just warmed up, and I didn't think I was gonna like it, like a warmed up oyster with, but it was delicious. It was absolutely delicious. And that's how I fell in love with Island Creek. That's my love story.
That's a great story. Yeah, those warm oyster preps, I feel like people are doing more of these days, and I love them. I think it's delish. It's not quite, especially for our oysters, which are not huge, right? They're not a Gulf or even a Chesapeake oyster. They can be pretty petite.
Mm-hmm.
You throw them under the salamander or whatever, and they get roasted up pretty quick and kind of like they shrivel,
Yeah.
But whereas those nice warm preps is like brings out some of the flavors, and they add things into it. But you still have that nice full meat and the liquor inside the shell. So I'm a huge fan of that also.
So let's talk a little bit of your farm practices. Like what goes into growing your oyster. I know you said you guys do the bottom. Was it racks?
So we do we grow 3 different types now.
Okay.
So the Island Creeks are kind of the core, product that we've got, and definitely the most of our seed goes to planting Island Creeks, and those have always been and likely will always be bottom grown. So we grow them out in our nursery until they're about a half inch, so relatively small seed, and then we just broadcast them on the bottom of Duxbury Bay. And the reason why we can do that is there's a very specific set of kind of substrate conditions, right? So you can't bottom plant when it's too muddy, because the oysters kind of sink and suffocate in the mud, and you can't bottom plant when it's too sandy, because they get washed away with any sort of bad weather or current or things like that. They move all over the place. So we have this kind of unique situation where we have a layer of relatively firm sand, and then there's a tiny like top layer, like icing on a cake of silt. So the oysters have this nice little bed to just sit in, and it's kind of perfect. And we also don't have a lot of natural predation on the oysters. That's the other thing. They're not protected, obviously, when they're on the bottom. And we do see lower yields off the bottom, but we don't have like diving ducks or crabs or things that are kind of decimating our crop. So the other thing we do is we grow the row 34s and the Aunt Dottie's. The row 34s are grown on the Island Creek farm right beside the Island Creeks, but they're grown in gear for their whole life. So they're grown in like a rack or a tray, or like an open tray. And then the Aunt Dottie's are also grown in gear, but they're grown out at the end of the beach on a different farm location that's actually in Plymouth, a little village of Plymouth called Sakewish. So one thing that I'll say is that, one of the things that makes Island Creeks unique is that they are bottom grown. And especially in Massachusetts, and really most of New England, that's pretty rare these days. Almost all growers are using some form of gear. And I think that there's upsides and downsides to both. We kind of hedge, and obviously with the rows and the Aunt Dottie's, we do a little bit of each. You get a more consistent oyster out of the gear. The shapes are more consistent, the shell density, the yield is much higher, right? You can put X amount of seed into a tray, you get 0.9X out. Whereas with the bottom planting, we're lucky, in a great, fantastic year, we'll get 50% yield. And most of the time it's more like 30 or 40. But I think that while it's less consistent, like an Island Creek, the best bottom grown oyster in my mind is the best oyster that you can possibly eat. It's got the nice robust shell, the meat texture is a huge component of tasting for me. The meat, it's got this nice toothy bite to it, really three-dimensional flavor. It's hard to beat, but there's more variation. The cull's not as tight. It's almost like a free range oyster. Whereas the row 34s and the Aunt Dottie's and all the other trade grown stuff is a lot more cookie cutter, right? You know what you're going to get. The shells are a little more delicate. The meat's a little more delicate. The flavor's a little less nuanced, but you can get a bag of 100 of them, and 95 of them are going to be pretty damn close to perfect. So that's kind of my take on it. That's some of the husbandry practices that we use, and just kind of messing around and still trial and error every day.
Yeah, you kind of answered my question, because I'm thinking if you got 50% yield, like, why wouldn't you just throw the rights? But at the end of the day, it's about the quality of the oyster that you're actually putting out, to the world, because that says everything about you. You send you send your kids out, and if they're disrespectful out there, man, that makes you like a bad parent.
I know the feeling.
No doubt, man. That's awesome though. Far as salinity and flavor profile between the three types of oysters, could you break them down?
Yeah, so the Island Creeks are so I think that the best thing about the Island Creeks, because we have this super cold salty water, but they're also in a bay kind of feasting on this kind of rich buffet of plankton. They have this incredible range of really high salt content, right? You get up front, you get this burst of full seawater right from Duxbury Bay when you're eating Island Creek, but then on the back end, there's this incredibly sweet finish. And all these nice kind of mossy, vegetally flavors in the middle, depending on the season, that's why I think they've become so revered by chefs and now by people shucking at home. So they're kind of, if that's our benchmark, right? The rows, because they're grown right on the farm next to the Island Creeks, they're very similar, obviously, but what I always say is like a row 34 smells like an Island Creek. Like I always smell the oyster before I eat it, just to get
Mm-hmm.
the flavor really going. And they smell identical. But then when you actually taste them, the rows are a little more subtle and definitely more on the like chicken broth umami end of things, being
Nice.
up off the bottom. You know, and even if you look at their shells, the Island Creeks have this green algae growing on their shells, and they usually have limpets and other things that are kind of hangers on. And then the rows are cleaner, right? And they're cream and brown color shell, with some nice white in there. But it tells a very different story, and the flavor reflects that also. But again, subtle difference. The bigger difference is with the Aunt Dottie's, because like I said, they're grown, almost a mile away on the other side of, at the end of the beach, in a really different environment. Like it's exposed to the Northeast in the winter. The oysters are actually exposed more. They're like a solid 2 hours, 2.5 hours out of the water every day, regardless of the tide cycle in the month. So what you get there, again, not totally dissimilar from the Island Creek and the Row 34, but it's kind of like a more complex, and there's like, it's not bitter, but there's a nice kind of like walnut oily kind of note in there that I think, makes it less of like the beginner oyster. It's like a little more of like an advanced tasting oyster, but adds a lot of complexity and interest, I find. So a little more intense flavor overall in the Aunt Dottie's.
So between the three types of oysters, how many oysters do you guys have out in the ocean now?
That is a good question. I don't know if I can accurately answer that. Like
I mean, are we talking about millions, hundreds of thousands?
yeah, there's probably, between two, like the market crop that we're harvesting and next year's seed crop, I've got to imagine there's probably something like 10 or 12 million oysters on our farms. And then, yeah, I mean, all the farms in Duxbury, I would imagine there's probably 30, 40 million oysters that are planted out into Duxbury Bay every year. So they're doing their job cleaning up the bay and
No doubt.
giving us, well, livelihood and also something good to eat. So
Yeah. So what are some of the biggest changes you've seen in the oyster industry since you've been in last 13 years with Island Creek?
oh, that's a good question. Epic change. So much
Epic.
change. Yeah, I mean, so the crazy thing to think about is like when I first started, we were, the Skip and Christian Horn and Don Mary and some of the early like group of Island Creek growers, they had just started to kind of figure out the farming. They're having like a decent sized crop coming online every year. But we're not talking millions of oysters, it's still relatively small potatoes, particularly by today's standards, but we didn't have a market to sell them into. The demand for oysters, the number of the restaurants that had oyster lists was so much smaller than it is now, that we were traveling to Hong Kong and France and all over the place trying to just make sure we had enough outlets to move the volume that we were producing. Whereas now, I mean, it's been years since we've even come close to having enough supply to meet demand. And that's partially due to the brand recognition for Island Creek, and also due to just the overall kind of insane growth in demand for oysters, the number of restaurant accounts that list them. I mean, we used to sell direct to 20, 30 restaurants, and now we sell to almost 1,000 in 40 something states. We're talking, it's just been nuts. So that's been a big change. And then the other thing that's changed is like where those markets are, right? It used to be we'd only try to sell stuff in oyster towns, right? So New York, Boston, Seattle, San Francisco, like, towns that had a more of a history of oyster culture. Chicago also, I should say, they're not all coastal. And always those were big urban hubs with, pretty sophisticated dining scenes. And, then we started to see it radiate out, and it was Miami, and it was, Dallas and Houston, and it was like kind of these other towns that you wouldn't necessarily think of as being big oyster towns. And then it radiated out again, where we were starting to sell to like Austin, Texas, and Minneapolis, and then once more, where all of a sudden then it was the suburbs around those cities, and then it was random places, like a little town in Georgia, and like Missouri, and Idaho, we have accounts, and Ski Mountain started buying them. And like, so that to me has been like the growth and demand for it. And then just the pervasiveness of the appeal of sitting around eating a raw oyster has really just totally blown my hair back over the last 13 years. And I can't tell you how many times Skip and I sat around and we sat around Shore. Gregory used to work with us also. And we were like, when is it going to end? Like, we were like, this has got to be some sort of fad or something. And we were literally prepared. We'd stash, be trying to save money and like for like when it was all going to come crashing down.
Yeah, no doubt. And that's the way I describe it to people. I was like, man, you know what? Oysters are trending right now, and I'm just gonna ride this wave. And you just every year going into the next year, I was like, well, it's been a good run. So this was a good year.
Yep.
Let's see what next year brings. It just gets bigger and bigger. And like, I just feel like, honestly, I feel like I'm not gonna deny it anymore. I'm just gonna say, you know what? This is just the start of something beautiful.
It's so true.
Literally in the beginning days of, well, you know what? This will take me into the next question. How has climate change affected the farm?
Good question.
Has it? Do you see, like, what are you seeing?
It's hard. I guess it's hard to say, right? Like that's the trick of it. Like on one hand, absolutely. I do think that as farmers and people who run businesses that are generally subject to all kinds of crazy negative externalities that are out of our control, I think that some of the climate change dialogue, right, is like kind of regular people who have, maybe they work in insurance or real estate or something, and they all of a sudden are looking around and saying, wait a second, the weather and the climate and the natural environment around me can start having a negative impact on my livelihood and my property, and everyone's freaking out. And for us, it's a little bit like, welcome to the party. That's what we've dealt with every day. Every month, there's a storm hits, or the water gets too hot. There's a disease event, like, something dies in the ecosystem and throws everything off. So for us, it's kind of like climate change is doing more of what we already have to do just to survive in the seafood business. But on the other hand, coming off of like just last week or 10 days ago or so, we had just a ripper of a nor'easter that came through Duxbury, and we had like 100 and something trees down across wires, and the farm was a mess, and we didn't have power for 4 or 5 days. And that's one thing, like the intensity and frequency of these storms, it's been tough to deal with. This year we had like hurricane and tropical storm activity coming through up the coast in like early July, which is just kind of, in my experience, unprecedented. And it was not just one rogue storm, it was a handful of them. So that's continually challenging our whole kind of value chain. It's a lot of cost in having to deal with that. So that's one thing that I can point to for sure that feels like a climate related impact on the farm, but also our whole kind of oyster business. And, and it's a bummer.
Definitely a bummer. Because as far as the trending of oysters, I don't see any stop to that. But when you talk about a good tropical storm or a tropical storm coming through and wiping a farm out, especially like how it was down in the South, and just, that's a business, that's a farm, that's somebody's life that's just been destroyed due to, the new climate things that we got going on. So, I'm always thinking about that also. Let's see, man, we've talked about a lot. Is there anything I've left out?
How about I ask you some questions, Gardner?
Oh, snap. Oh, snap. Oh, it's always one. Go ahead, man.
Okay, so I think from a shucker's perspective,
yeah.
What's your favorite oyster to shuck?
Why would you do that?
Just putting you on the spot.
Now, I'm trying to get my podcast monetized and
I'll tell you what. You don't have to name any names, but tell me your favorite broad type of oyster to shuck.
No, honestly, I'm I'm not shy about this. I got a bunch of oysters I like to shuck, man. Whitestone is one of them.
Beautiful.
Um, I like that the nice hard shell, nice deep cup oyster. Ruby salts from the Eastern Shore. I love those. It's a good oyster to shuck. It's a good tasting oyster. It reminds me of home. Nice briny. A good mixture of the saltiness from the Atlantic Ocean, sweetness from the Chesapeake Bay. I like that one. Um, Coochies. I love coochies. I love to shuck those small cocktail size oysters and Coochie, Olympia, Kumamoto. I like all of those oysters to shuck and to eat, surprisingly. Uh, but it's just also when I was working in the bar, I found a difference of what a few days can matter out of the water. So I did this event for Taylor Shellfish in DC, and he had the oysters overnight, overnight ship. And I was like, these are amazing because I had tried Kumamoto's before, wasn't my thing. But that nice fresh oyster, I was like, oh my gosh. Like I
Oh
saw
yeah,
what the hype was about.
yeah. It's a huge difference.
Yeah. I haven't shucked your oysters in a long time. Like I said, since 2015, but it definitely got me going on my oyster journey because I really wasn't a fan of oysters. But that's also it got me going like tasting different oysters as far as flavor profile. And just I was like, okay, all right, every oyster doesn't taste the same. So that's why I try and teach the people now. You've had that oyster, but try this one, you know?
That's it. I mean, it's funny you mentioned the Whitestones because I think I've always been like a big proponent of. I think that part of what keeps people coming back time and again and kind of like leaning in and digging deeper into this whole oyster culture thing
Mhm.
is the variety, right? Like there's so much. It's like wine or craft beer or something like that. Like it's endless. Your kind of oyster journey can be a lifelong thing.
Yeah.
But I see a lot of like regionalism, you know what I mean? Where people are like, oh, I only like oysters from Maine, or I only like oysters from, the Pacific Northwest. And
Mhm.
uh, always try to encourage people to approach it like a wine list. You know what I mean? Like you wouldn't just drink, Gruner Veltliner all the time and be like, I just drink Gruner. It's like the beauty of it is you can branch out and taste all these different wines. And I sent. We have this Oyster of the Month club that we do for customers on our website, and it's a
Yeah, I
popular
actually
thing.
did want to talk about that. I'm sorry, but go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so it's a popular thing, right? And because they just arrived, which is pretty great, and we try to do a variety. And what we've found though is like a lot of people sign up because they want our oysters, they want stuff from New England, and we tried to like send the Whitestones, which I think are a beautiful, like gorgeous little oyster. Like they're so perfect and like cute as a button, and they're good. They taste really good, but they're way different, right? Like there's significantly lower salinity than like an Island Creek or Pemaquid or anything like that. And a lot of our Oyster of the Month customers, we got a lot of negative feedback about that. And I was like, this is a gorgeous oyster. It'd be like taking a different type of wine and like a beautiful example of that wine and being like, oh, it's bad wine. It's like, it's not bad wine. It's different.
Wow,
You know?
okay.
Um, so like that's my like continual challenge, is getting people to break through their kind of like regional, affinity for the local oysters where they live, and to branch out and really, and for oyster bars to get a good variety on there. There's not, a lot of people have kind of entrenched in their own local stuff, which is not a bad thing, but I
Right.
think missing out on something there.
The weird thing is like when you just started talking, I just like I'm going through more oysters now. It was a oyster from Damariscotta, I believe. I think it was Barstool oysters. I like those. And then it was some out of the Carolinas, Savage Inlet. It's really a lot of good oysters out here. That's the great thing about it. And I know I'm forgetting a lot more oysters, but oh, I got the little boss here.
Uh-oh.
But yeah, it's just a lot of good oysters out here, man. And but yeah, so how does that the oyster of the month work?
Yeah, so we're actually changing it now where like you go on into the website and you just you sign up and there's a whole like we tried to make it kind of like a farm share, but A, there's variety, and B, we try to make it super easy, right? So it's not like you have to drive to us to come get it. We'll ship it to you. And then we have this kind of like concierge customer service that goes along with it, where like if we have a lot of people who will ship it to, they're going away for the weekend, and that's the weekend where their oyster of the month shipment's coming. They'll ship it to their friend's house where they're staying or to their Airbnb or whatever. So that's a lot of fun. But basically, you sign up and you can sign up for a 3-month increment, or you can just sign up for um, you you can sign up for a 3-month increment, or you can just sign up and we'll just keep sending them and until you tell us to stop. So it's been popular. We got yeah, at one point last year we had like almost 1,000 people that were signed up
Wow,
on a
that's
monthly basis.
beautiful, man.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
You want to talk a little bit about your caviar?
Yeah, that's been a fun news. Caviar and then tinned fish conservas have been our two big kind of like new products that we pushed into. Caviar, we just found that there's a lot of great farms that were out there and starting in the U.S., which is a relatively new phenomenon, and they weren't necessarily getting repped. Like it was kind of like oysters used to be before this whole movement, where it'd be like, oh, these are East Coast oysters or they're West Coast oysters, really kind of generic, and you wouldn't know the farmer and kind of how they're produced. We saw the same thing with caviar, where you had a lot of people buying caviar and then slapping their brand on it, and you never really know. There's a lot of question and kind of uneducation about caviar. So our whole mission has been to highlight those innovative new producers from here in North America, and also to kind of bring in the best from overseas, but to be 100% transparent about the producers, and also to educate people on not only the sustainability practices of those producers, but also just the basics of caviar, which is like there are different species of sturgeon. There's different grades of caviar. It can be really daunting for people, so we really just tried to break it down, make it simple, but also make it approachable and most importantly fun. Because if you're not having fun eating caviar, then
Exactly. What's the need
what's the
for it?
point?
So, what kind of caviar are you carrying?
So a couple of the farms we work with Sterling Caviar out of California. They're actually one of the first, I think the first actual aquaculture caviar farm in the world. So they're a big and established player. They grow white sturgeon is the species. It's delicious. It's kind of, I call it like kind of the Kumamoto of caviar. It's a crowd pleaser, right? Like there's not, it's a great way to introduce people to caviar. It's got like big flavor, beautiful texture. There's just a lot going on. And then we work with Marshallberg farms in North Carolina. They grow, the species of sturgeon they grow is Ocetra. It's a little bit of a higher grade caviar. It's a much more subtle flavor profile, big, beautiful beads. That's a really nice product. We work with Adamas, which is an Italian producer. They're from over in Lombardy. They grow a Siberian sturgeon, so yet another species. We're working on a trout roe project with Hudson Valley Fisheries up in New York State, taking some of their sustainably raised trout roe and curing it. So we got a lot of fun things going on in the caviar packing room. But one thing to note is that a lot of people will buy caviar, put their brand on it. We actually buy original tins from these producers. We age it ourselves, and we do all the packing in-house, which gives us a level of control over the quality and the process that very few outlets actually have. It's really just the farms and a handful of reputable distributors that have that type of infrastructure and packing capacity. So that's kind of our value add there.
Yeah, that's special, man. That's different.
It's been fun. It's really just like a big excuse for me and some of the other people who work here to eat a lot of caviar. So
What else is Island Creek doing that people really don't know about? Is there anything
yeah,
I'm missing out?
no, I think that's it. It's like, well, we got our whole farm experience thing. So if you're ever up
That's
in
cool.
the Boston area, we're just 45 minutes outside the city, and you can come tour the farm. And we got an outdoor raw bar. We just tonight actually we're opening a restaurant right across the street, like an old 19th century shipbuilders mansion that we bought, renovated, and are opening a restaurant in. So we're creating this whole little, what we like to think is a shining example of a coastal community here in Duxbury that people can come down and witness firsthand, and have some fun, learn about aquaculture, drink some good wine, eat some good oysters, that type of thing. So,
and kid friendly.
Very kid friendly. I think sometime in the summer, I think we're like the weekend childcare option for most of the greater Boston area. So there's hundreds of kids at the farm every weekend. So bring your kids along. For
cool,
sure.
Man. Any lasting idea to plant or seeds to plant in the listeners' mind?
Yeah, that's a good question, Gardner. Hey, one of the things that I guess this is for the other growers and people out there that might be listening is, we have all benefited from this idea of kind of like brand and transparency, and like, hey, this is an Island Creek. This oyster is grown in Duxbury. It's bottom planted, and it's kind of single origin. You know what you're going to get. And I think that no one's doing anything like irresponsible or unethical. But I think as an industry, people have gotten a little crazy with brand names, right? Where you have like a bunch of people that are producing an oyster and they're selling it as like 3 or 4 different brands, which is fine. But I think from my perspective, kind of undermines that connection to the grower, but you could literally be on an oyster list, at a raw bar somewhere and be eating 2 different oysters that have different names and they're coming from the same farm, grown in the same way. And I think that for me is like one troubling trend I've seen. And again, it's nothing in comparison to the rest of the food system, and it's nothing unethical. I just think it's not a great move for our industry to get too cute with the names and the brands and things like that.
I like that.
So that's my soapbox speech for all the listeners.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you guys for being such a reliable brand over the years. A reliable quality oyster. I really do appreciate that. Where can the listeners, find your website, your social media, all that good stuff?
Yeah, so it's islandcreekoysters.com. We're on Instagram at Island Creek Oysters. And if you Google us, you can find us just about anywhere. And if you give us a ring, we can tell you which restaurants are listing our product. And, we also do distribute oysters for a lot of the other farms, particularly here in New England. So if you're looking for a certain oyster from a certain small producer or whatever, always a good place to start here. We usually have a good track on it. So look us up and definitely come visit. Gardner, I'd love to have you up to the farm if you get up to this area.
I would love to make it. And now that I know that you guys are babysitters, babysitters also.
Oh, yeah.
It makes it a little easier.
Yeah, it's a combination of babysitting and just letting them run amok. So
that too. Yeah, no, that is a babysitter. That's the country babysitter.
That's it.
No doubt, man. Appreciate you. Okay.
Gardner, thanks a lot, man. Thanks for doing the podcast too. I'm a big fan, so appreciate you spreading the good word.
Man, I love to hear that.
All right, man. Well, good luck out there. Thanks for having me.
All right.